picture the year 701 BC.
Okay.
You are standing inside the fortified walls of Jerusalem, and outside those walls, the Assyrian war machine has completely surrounded the city.
Yeah, the most terrifying military force on the face of the earth at that time.
Spot on. They are absolutely brutal, and Sennacherib's generals are standing out there screaming taunts in Hebrew over the wall, trying to, induce a panic.
Which is a very effective psychological tactic.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So inside the city, King Hezekiah and his commanders are locked in a room, and they're desperately trying to formulate a military strategy to survive.
Right. They need a plan.
Yeah, and the ancient Hebrew word for the high-stakes intellectual warfare happening in that room is us.
Yes.
It translates to counsel or deliberate planning.
Hmm.
But here's the paradox. That exact same word is also used by ancient writers to describe the literal physical wooden logs that an invading army chops down to build a siege ramp.
It is such a jarring contrast.
It really is. I mean, the abstract genius of the war room and the physical dirt and timber of the battlefield are bound up in the exact same linguistic sound.
It is fascinating.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Thank you for joining us today for this deep dive into the sources. We are taking a stack of lexicons, grammatical notes, and historical commentaries, and we are going to unpack the incredibly layered reality of a single word.
And it is quite a word.
It really is. Today, we are investigating us. That is spelled ʿēṣâ. We are going to look at its three distinct meanings in the lexical data, examine how it operates in the ancient texts, and uncover what it reveals about the friction between human scheming and the sovereign providence of the Creator.
Which is a massive theological topic.
Huge. To do that, I am joined by my co-host, someone who spends an inordinate amount of time analyzing the morphological structures of ancient Near Eastern languages. So let us jump right in. We have a word here that bridges boardroom strategy and wooden siege ramps. What is the actual fundamental root we are dealing with?
Well, we are starting with the primary verbal root, which is ya.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the verb yas means to counsel, to advise, or to consult. And from that verb, we derive the feminine noun.
Got it.
If you look at the statistical data from the Hebrew Bible, this specific noun appears 88 times.
88. So that is not super rare, but it is not everywhere either.
Right. In the grand scheme of biblical vocabulary, 88 occurrences is a fascinating sweet spot.
How so?
Well, it is frequent enough that any ancient reader or listener would immediately recognize it and understand its cultural weight. But it's not so common that it's a filler word,
Yeah, it keeps its punch.
Precisely. It
Yeah.
contains a very sharp, specific edge. But what is truly captivating is that its footprint is not confined to Israelite literature. We see this root branching out across the entire ancient Near East.
Right, and the lexicons provide a list of where else this root appears. We see it in Jewish Aramaic and Christian Palestinian Aramaic as azonta.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone listening who studies ancient history, Aramaic was the administrative glue of the ancient world.
It was the lingua franca.
Yeah, it was the language of international trade, diplomacy, and empire, especially under the Persians. So finding our word embedded in Aramaic dialects tells us that this concept of counsel was a standard part of ancient statecraft. It was the air the ancient diplomats breathed.
That is precisely it. The concept transcends regional borders. We also find it far to the south in Old South Arabia.
Oh, wow. Way down there.
Yeah, and there it carries the semantic nuance of an exhortation or a strict command.
Interesting.
But perhaps the most striking extra-biblical evidence provided in the data comes from the DRL inscriptions.
Okay, let us pause and talk about Deir Ella, because that is not a reference everyone will immediately recognize.
Fair enough.
If I recall the archaeological history, this was a major discovery back in the late 1960s in the Jordan Valley.
Yes, 1967, I believe.
Right. Excavators were digging up a sanctuary that had been destroyed by an earthquake in ancient times. And they found all these fragments of plaster that had fallen off the walls.
It is an incredible find.
And written on that plaster was a text concerning a figure named Balaam, the son of Beor.
Yes, the very same Balaam we read about in the Book of Numbers.
Wait, really? The exact same guy?
The exact same figure. And the Deir Allah text is written in a dialect that scholars debate heavily. I mean, some call it an ancient form of Aramaic. Others say it is a unique Canaanite dialect, perhaps related to Gileadite.
Okay, so a regional language.
Yeah. But the text describes Balaam receiving a vision from the gods who have formed a council. They're gathered together, making decrees.
A divine council.
Right. And right there, on a plaster wall in the Jordan Valley, written over 2.5 millennia ago, we find this lexical root.
That is wild.
It proves that the idea of a formal, deliberate gathering to render a decision, a binding piece of counsel, was a universal theological and administrative concept in that era.
So we have a word that spans from southern Arabian Peninsula to plaster walls in Jordan to Aramaic diplomatic courts.
Yes, it is everywhere.
But the lexicons make a massive distinction about the nature of this communication because, well, we use the word advice very loosely today.
Oh, constantly.
Right. I might give you advice on what coffee machine to buy, or I might advise you to take an umbrella because the sky looks gray.
Sure.
That is a fleeting, casual opinion. But the linguistic data suggests is an entirely different animal.
It is entirely different. The data demonstrates that primarily refers to spoken instruction, but it is instruction that only comes after rigorous, thoughtful calculation.
So no off-the-cuff remarks.
None. The sources explicitly compare it to another Hebrew word, mashaba.
And what does that mean?
It translates to thought or calculated intention.
Ah, okay.
When a person offers that, they are not throwing an idea at the wall to see what sticks. They have analyzed the variables. They've looked at the historical precedents. They have calculated the risks.
It is a thorough process.
Very much so. Only after that mental labor is complete do they speak. The lexicon defines it as words of instruction provided after consultation and calculation to assist in a decision-making process.
It is formal protocol.
Yes, it's a formal mechanism of the state.
You know, that structural formality really shines through when you look at the grammatical variations, the lexicons list.
Oh, the grammar is very telling here.
We have the construct state, which is yet. We have the suffixes that indicate possession, like adadi, meaning my counsel or your counsel.
Right.
And we have the plural form, meteg.
Right.
I want to push on this grammar for a second. In English, we just throw an apostrophe S on a word to show possession. But in ancient Hebrew, when you use the construct state to bind two words together, or when you attach a possessive suffix to a noun like this, what is happening psychologically?
That is a great question.
Why does it matter that an ancient advisor would say, this is my counsel?
It matters because of the immense liability involved.
Liability?
Yes. In the construct state, you bind the advice inextricably to the identity of the person giving it. It becomes the counsel of the king or the counsel of the elders.
You cannot separate the idea from the speaker.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. When an advisor uses a pronominal suffix and says, "Idi my counsel," they are staking their reputation and often their life on the success of that plan.
Wow. So if it fails...
If the plan fails, the failure belongs entirely to them. You see this dynamic constantly in ancient courts. The individuals authorized to give this kind of heavyweight, calculated advice were very specific figures.
Like who? Based on the sources, who actually had the authority to give this kind of advice?
The texts point to the Hakam, the recognized wise man, as we see in Jeremiah 18:18. We see the elders offering it in Ezekiel 7:26.
The seasoned veterans.
Yeah, and we see competing factions of advisors offering it, which brings us to one of the most disastrous political moments in the entire historical record of Israel.
The events of 1 Kings chapter 12. The schism under King Rehoboam. I think this historical event perfectly illustrates the sheer gravity of this word. Let us set the scene. Solomon has just died.
Right, the end of a massive era.
Yeah, Solomon was famous for his wisdom, but he was also a builder of empire, and empires require massive taxation and forced labor. The northern tribes are exhausted, they are financially drained.
They are at a breaking point.
So Rehoboam inherits the throne, and the people essentially come to him with a union grievance. They say, "Your father made our yoke heavy, lighten the load, and we will yield to you."
It is a critical moment.
Rehoboam realizes this is a constitutional crisis. He does not need a quick tip. He needs an official policy framework. He needs dia.
Precisely. And the text shows him utilizing the formal protocol of the royal court. He first goes to the elders.
The guys who advised Solomon.
Yeah, the seasoned statesmen. He asks for their end on how to answer the people.
Yeah.
These are men who understand statecraft, economics, and human nature.
They've been doing this for decades.
They have. And they have done the calculation. They deliver a lenient, brilliant policy. They tell the young king, if you will be a servant to this people today and submit to them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever.
It is a calculated strategy of de-escalation.
It is diplomacy at its best.
But Rehoboam rejects that blueprint.
He does. He abandons the council of the elders. He then turns to the youth, the young aristocrats who had grown up with him in the palace.
The frat brothers, basically.
Yeah, essentially, yes. He asks for their O. Now, these young men have no practical experience in governance, but they are functioning in an official advisory capacity.
And their advice is terrible.
It is catastrophic. They deliver a policy of supreme arrogance and autocracy. They advise him to go back to the people and declare, "My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions."
It is a deliberate strategy of terror and intimidation. And because he chooses the O of the youth over the O of the elders, the nation fractures irreparably. 10 tribes walk away, and the kingdom is split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah.
A single decision tore the nation in half.
The fallout from that single choice reverberates for centuries.
It does, and the text highlights that both groups provided it.
Yeah.
The word itself is morally neutral. It simply defines the calculated nature of the plan.
The process is the same, but the outcome is different.
Exactly. The content of the plan dictates the survival or destruction of the state. We see this concept extended even to foreign empires. Isaiah 19 talks about the wise men of Pharaoh providing counsel.
So the Egyptian court operated on the exact same administrative principle.
They did, and Job talks about his own days of respect in the city square, noting in Job 29.21 that men waited in silence for his counsel. It was a commodity. It was a structured intellectual asset.
That is a great way to phrase it, a structured intellectual asset. But this brings up a fascinating psychological dynamic. If I is this intensely binding, intimate act of shared thought, what happens when that exact same intellectual machinery is hijacked by malice?
Ah, yes.
Because the texts do not just use this word for wisdom and statecraft, they use it for weaponized intellect, which leads us right into a massive academic debate surrounding one of the most famous verses in all of literature, Psalm 1, verse 1.
Yes. Psalm 1.1 introduces the phrase, ʿēṣâ.
And how is that usually translated?
In most English translations, you will read this as the counsel of the wicked. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked.
Okay, if I read that in English, my immediate assumption is that it is a warning about intellectual contamination.
Right.
It means do not adopt the bad ideas of corrupt people. Do not let their worldview shape your decision-making.
That is the traditional abstract interpretation. However, the lexical data reveals a fierce division among scholars regarding how to interpret the word āt in this specific context.
Why are they divided?
Because the question is, are we talking about the abstract ideas generated by godless people, or does the word actually refer to the physical, concrete community or council of those people?
Oh, I see. I want to make sure I am grasping the distinction here. I was reading through the notes from scholars like Bergmeyer and Sagan.
Yes. Those two are central to this debate.
And they argue heavily for the community translation. It is the difference between an idea and a room full of people. If I say the corporate board decided to cut funding, I'm using the word board to describe the physical collective of people sitting around the mahogany table, not just their abstract decision.
That is a perfect analogy.
So if we look at Psalm 1.1 through this spatial physical lens, the text is warning the listener against joining a specific social club.
Precisely. And Bergmeyer and Sagan do not just pull this theory out of thin air. They base their argument heavily on the linguistic habits we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Qumran texts.
Yeah, the lexicon explicitly cites the Qumran texts to support this view.
Let us expand on the Qumran community because their history perfectly illuminates this debate. We are talking about the Essenes.
Right, a very strict Jewish sect.
They flourished from roughly the 2nd century BC until the Romans destroyed their settlement in 68 AD. They looked at the religious establishment in Jerusalem, the priesthood at the temple, and they concluded that the entire system was irredeemably corrupt.
They wanted absolutely nothing to do with it.
So what did they do? They did not just write angry letters, they physically left. They marched out into the barren Judean desert near the Dead Sea and built their own isolated, hyper-strict community.
And when they wrote their founding documents, texts like the rule of the community, known by scholars as 1QS, they had to decide what to call their physical gathering.
And what word did they choose?
They chose the word yea.
Wow.
They refer to themselves as the yea, the community. They were the physical embodiment of a divine council on earth, standing in direct opposition to the corrupt society they had left behind.
So they took the word for a plan and made it the word for their group.
Yes. They had rigorous initiation rites, strict physical placement during meals and meetings based on rank, and absolute separation from outsiders.
So if you are in a scene living at Qumran and you read Psalm 1.1, Blessed is the man who walks not in the line. You are not just thinking about avoiding bad thoughts.
I don't know.
You are thinking about the geographic and social reality of your life. You literally refuse to walk into the community of the wicked in Jerusalem. You separated yourself physically. You walked out of their room.
That spatial interpretation drastically alters how you interact with the text. It demands a physical boundary, not just an intellectual one.
It is a literal boundary.
Yes. If you walk in the odor of the wicked, you are standing among them, participating in their collective identity, and normalizing their behavior by your physical presence.
But the scholarly debate is not entirely settled in favor of the physical community definition, is it? There are linguists who push back against Bergmeier and Sagan.
Correct. The data points to counterarguments, specifically drawing from texts like Isaiah 19.1.
What happens in that verse?
That verse discusses the foolish advice of Pharaoh's court, using the phrase anibara. A prominent scholar named Doom argues that in this instance, advice is an abstract term functioning as a metonymy for the concrete council of advisors.
So the idea stands in for the people.
Right. The text says the advice is foolish, but Doom suggests it means the council itself, the men sitting in the room, has become foolish. So you have this incredible fluidity.
It goes back and forth.
Yeah, the word can mean the blueprint on the table, or it can mean the men gathered around the table drawing the blueprint.
That fluidity is what makes ancient Hebrew so visceral. It refuses to let you detach the philosophy from the philosopher.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
And frankly, when bad philosophers get in a room together and start drawing blueprints, the results are catastrophic, which moves us directly into how this word is weaponized.
The dark side of counsel.
Yeah. When you look at the lexical entries for the negative uses of do, we are no longer talking about bad financial advice. We are looking at criminal conspiracy.
We are looking at premeditated malice. The texts provide a chilling catalog of how human calculation is used to destroy.
Give us an example from the sources.
In Jeremiah 18.23, the word is used to describe a literal assassination plot.
Let us unpack the historical context of that assassination plot, because it shows how formal this malice was. Jeremiah was prophesying during the final agonizing decades of the southern kingdom of Judah before the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC.
It was a very dark time.
Extremely dark. He was telling the kings, the priests, and the general public that their society was doomed because of their idolatry and injustice. He told them to surrender to Babylon.
Which is not a popular message.
Not at all. Obviously, the political and religious establishment viewed him as a traitor. They hated him.
They despise him. And so the establishment figures did not just form a mob, they held a meeting.
They strategize.
In Jeremiah 18.18, his enemies explicitly state, "Come, let us make plots against Jeremiah, for the law shall not perish from the priest, nor counsel from the wise, nor the word from the prophet."
So they think they are the smart ones.
They believed they held the true ģā, the true wisdom of the state. And because Jeremiah opposed them, they formulated a calculated, deliberate plan to silence him permanently.
Wow.
In verse 23, Jeremiah prays to God, acknowledging their plan of assassination against me. The word for that murderous conspiracy is ģē. It was a fully engineered scheme to commit murder.
It is terrifying because it is so calm and procedural.
Yes.
We see the same procedural malice directed at the vulnerable in Psalm 14.6. The text says, "You would put to shame the counsel of the poor." What does an economic look like in ancient Israel?
Well, in the ancient agrarian economy, a poor person's their calculated plan for survival, might involve gleaning from the edges of a field, relying on debt forgiveness during the Sabbath year, or seeking justice at the city gates where the elders sat.
Basic survival tactics.
Right, but the wicked formulate their own counter. They manipulate the courts. They rig the scales.
They find the loophole.
Yeah, they find legal loopholes to seize ancestral land and force the poor into debt slavery. They engineer a system that systematically humiliates and dismantles the survival strategies of the vulnerable.
It is weaponized bureaucracy.
Weaponized bureaucracy. That is an exact description.
And when you scale that up from a local court to an international border, you get war.
You do.
The lexicons dedicate a significant amount of space to the military applications of this word. We see the phrase counsel and might for war.
Yes. 2 Kings 18.20 and the parallel account in Isaiah 36.5 use the specific phrase, oko shuro lamilama.
Meaning counsel and might for war.
Right. The lexicons classify this usage specifically as generalship. It is the art of military strategy.
This takes us right back to that terrifying scene we started with. the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem.
It connects perfectly.
Sennacherib's army has already devastated Lachish, the second most important city in Judah. They have completely surrounded Jerusalem, and the Assyrian field commander, the Rabshakeh, stands outside the wall and shouts to the defenders, mocking their
He is mocking their intelligence.
Yeah, he essentially says, do you think mere words are strategy and strength for war? Who are you relying on? He is taunting their war room.
He knows they are trapped.
He is telling them that all their intellectual calculations, all their diplomatic alliances with Egypt, are utterly worthless against the sheer kinetic force of the Assyrian army.
The Rabshakeh understood that war requires both components, Ni, the strategy, and Kura, the kinetic might. He claimed Jerusalem lacked both.
They were outmatched on paper and on the field.
Exactly. And it is fascinating to contrast this military usage with Zechariah 6.13, which speaks of a Nisotolam, a council of peace.
Oh, the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah. That passage envisions a future where the royal and priestly offices collaborate in perfect harmony to rebuild the temple and secure tranquility. So the word governs the entire spectrum of national survival, from orchestrating a bloodbath to drafting a peace treaty.
But no matter how brilliant the generals or the diplomats are, human is incredibly fragile.
Oh, highly fragile.
I was looking at the verbs the lexicons associate with this word, and they paint a picture of futility. Human plans do not just fail, they are actively dismantled.
Right.
I want you to walk through the mechanics of these verbs because the Hebrew grammar here is crucial for understanding how the biblical authors viewed human hubris.
The verbs are very revealing. The text states that human counsel can be swallowed up or confounded, as seen in Isaiah 19.3.
Swallowed up.
Yes. The Hebrew verb used there is bala. Now, this is where the verbal stems, or binyanim, in Hebrew becomes so important. This verb appears in the pile stem.
Okay, let us pause and explain the pile stem, because that changes the entire temperature of the verse. If I understand correctly, the standard simple active voice in Hebrew is called the qual stem.
Correct.
But the pile stem indicates intensive action.
That is right. To give an analogy, if you use a verb in the qual stem to say you broke a clay jar, it means the jar is broken. Perhaps it's split into a few pieces.
A clean break.
Sure. But if you use the same verb in the pile stem, it means you smashed that jar into powder. You pulverized it.
Oh, wow. So it is a violent action.
It is an intensive violent action. So when Isaiah 19.3 says the Council of Egypt will be Bala in the pile stem, it does not mean their diplomatic strategy was simply misplaced in a filing cabinet, or that they made a slight miscalculation.
What does it mean?
It means God violently swallowed it up. He devoured their strategy. He annihilated their intellectual efforts.
That is a staggering image. God devouring a nation's foreign policy? What are the other verbs?
We see the verb satar, which means to hide or conceal, used in Isaiah 29.15. It describes those who try to deeply hide their counsel from the Lord.
They are scheming in the dark.
Yeah. And then we have the verb hofer, used in Psalm 33.0. Hofer means to frustrate, to thwart, or to break. The verse says, the Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He frustrates the plans of the peoples.
So humans invest immense psychological and political energy into these blueprints, but a sovereign God snaps them like twigs.
That is the biblical perspective, yes.
This raises a question based on a phrase found in Deuteronomy 32.28. The text talks about a nation that is lacking in counsel.
Right.
If A can be a malicious plot, an assassination conspiracy, or an arrogant military strategy that God has to devour, is lacking it always a bad thing? Or does lacking counsel mean lacking basic practical sanity?
In the context of Deuteronomy 32, which is the magnificent song of Moses, lacking counsel is a catastrophic state.
Wow.
The Hebrew phrase is ḥēṣâ.
And what does that imply?
It describes a people completely devoid of the ability to make sound decisions for their own well-being. They lack practical sagacity. They cannot read the geopolitical map, and they cannot understand the theological reality of their covenant with God.
They are flying blind.
Completely blind. So while age can certainly be twisted for evil, the capacity to form a sound, wise plan is viewed as a necessary structural requirement for human flourishing. To have no compass at all is a tragedy.
Okay, so we have established the precarious, fragile nature of human planning. Humans sit in war rooms, they form secretive councils, they draft legislation, but those plans are routinely swallowed up, frustrated, and brought to nothing.
Yes.
But the linguistic data presents an absolute categorical shift when we move from human planning to the counsel of the Creator. We enter an entirely different weight class.
We shift from the realm of the tentative to the realm of the absolute.
Let us dig into that.
The lexicons point to a series of specific phrases that elevate the word ānā to describe divine sovereignty. Jeremiah 32.1 Tharminate declares that God is great in counsel, ʿēṣâ.
Great in counsel.
Psalm 33.11 speaks of the counsel of Yahweh, contrasting it directly with the frustrated counsel of the nations we just discussed. Isaiah 5.1 mentions the counsel of the Holy One of Israel.
And there is a messianic connection, too.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
The sources note a massive prophetic intersection in Isaiah 11.2, which speaks of the spirit of counsel and might resting upon the promised Messiah.
A figure who will perfectly execute the divine will on earth. How does the text differentiate God's counsel from the human counsel we have been analyzing? I mean, if humans use on to plan a siege or exploit a debtor, what is the scope of God's on?
The scope is the very fabric of reality itself.
Okay, elaborate on that.
The lexicon draws our attention to the book of Job, specifically Job 38.2 and Job 42.3. In these chapters, God finally answers Job out of the whirlwind.
Right. Job has been questioning everything.
Job has been demanding an explanation for his suffering. He is trying to subject God's actions to human logic. But God's response bypasses human logic entirely.
He does not answer those specific questions.
No, God asked Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid. God's decision or counsel here relates directly to the architectural planning of creation.
The structural base.
A prominent scholar cited in the lexical notes, Von Rad, describes God's ein as almost his providence.
Providence.
Yes, it is a sovereign, unalterable plan that dictates the boundaries of the oceans, the orbits of the stars, and the unfolding of human history.
I think the best way to visualize this difference is to compare an architect with a person who is just rearranging the furniture in a living room.
I like that.
We humans make our little plans, our humanae. We argue about whether the couch should go against the wall or near the window. We might even form a committee to debate the color of the rug.
That is our boardroom strategy.
Yeah, but God's dea is the architect who drew the blueprints for the entire house. He laid the concrete foundation, he raised the load-bearing walls, he determined the pitch of the roof.
Right.
Human plans are reactive. We are just responding to the space we are in. God's plan is structural. It is the basis of existence.
That is a phenomenal comparison, and the ancient texts continually reinforce that architectural authority. God does not just draw the blueprint. He ensures it is executed flawlessly.
Give us an example from the text.
The lexicon cite Isaiah 46.11, where God declares, calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my counsel from a far country. I have spoken, and I will bring it to pass. I have purposed, and I will do it.
Let us examine that verse, because the historical context is mind-bending. The man of my counsel, ʻēṣâ, that God is referring to here, is Cyrus the Great, the king of the Persian Empire.
Yes, Cyrus.
Isaiah is prophesying this roughly a century and a half before Cyrus is even born. God says he is going to call this pagan emperor from the east, like a bird of prey, to conquer Babylon and allow the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple.
It is an incredible prophecy.
Cyrus has his own humania. He thinks he is just executing his own brilliant military strategy to expand the Persian Empire. But the text reveals that Cyrus is actually just a tool in the hand of God, executing the divine blueprint.
God's El subsumes and utilizes the you of human emperors.
It is the ultimate display of sovereignty.
It is. The proverb rings true. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. That is Proverbs 19.21. The divine need does not bend. It does not get swallowed up. It stands forever.
So if God's blueprint is absolute and unalterable, how do humans react to it? Do we just look at the architect's plans, nod our heads, and align our furniture accordingly?
Hardly. The human reaction is characterized by aggressive hostility.
Aggressive hostility. Why?
The lexicon points to Psalm 107.11, which pairs God's counsel with the Hebrew verb mea.
And what does nea mean?
Ne means to despise, to spurn, or to treat with utter contempt. The text describes people who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death because they rebelled against the words of God and spurned nea, the counsel of the Most High.
They despise the load-bearing walls. They want to tear down the structural integrity of the house because they did not design it.
That is exactly it.
And that visceral concept of despising the divine blueprint leads us directly into what I consider the most fascinating academic dispute in our data today. We are moving into what the lexicons label, meaning two. We are stepping into a lexical mystery.
It is a massive debate over the very DNA of the language.
Walk us through it.
Well, we have spent this entire time unpacking meaning I, which covers everything from war strategy to divine providence. It all falls under the umbrella of deliberate planning.
Right.
But the lexical data introduces a proposed second root, a meaning to for nida. According to a specific faction of scholars, this second root does not mean counsel at all.
What does it mean?
They argue it translates exclusively to revolt, resistance, or disobedience.
Revolt. So we are no longer talking about a flawed plan. We are talking about categorized, defined rebellion. What is the textual evidence they use to justify inventing an entirely new definition?
The primary battlegrounds for this debate are two specific verses, Psalm 106.43 and Psalm 13.3.
Okay, let us look at Psalm 106 first.
In Psalm 106.43, the psalmist is recounting the historical failures of the Israelites during the wilderness wanderings. The text says many times he delivered them, but they were rebellious in their purposes.
And where is our word there?
Some translators and scholars look at the word nigh in that sentence and say it must be translated as their disobedience or their revolt.
Because translating it as counsel does not seem to fit.
Right. Similarly, in Psalm 13.3, David is in agony, crying out, "How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day?"
And they challenge that translation too.
Yes. Some scholars argue that take counsel makes no sense there, and it should be translated as how long must I bear this revolt or resistance in my soul?
I was reviewing the notes, and the heavyweights of Hebrew lexicography are completely divided on this. You have Kohler Baumgartner, the massive standard lexicon, often abbreviated as KBL, and you have a highly influential scholar named Driver.
Yes, KBL and Driver are the main proponents.
And they stand up and argue fiercely for this second distinct root. They say we need a completely separate dictionary entry. It is a homonym. It sounds identical to the word for counsel, but it comes from a completely different etymological origin.
That is their position.
But other scholars look at that and reject it entirely. Walk us through the mechanics of how scholars fight over a dead language. Why are they drawing battle lines over this?
To understand the debate, we need a biological analogy.
Yeah.
Think about convergent evolution in biology.
Okay, I am tracking.
A shark is a fish and a dolphin is a mammal. They have completely different genetic ancestors, completely different DNA. But because they both adapted to the same aquatic environment, they ended up looking very similar. They both have dorsal fins and streamlined bodies.
Right. They look alike, but their origins are totally distinct.
Spot on. Scholars like Driver and the editors of KBL look at the word up, meaning counsel, and the word up, meaning revolt, and they argue it is a case of linguistic convergent evolution.
So they just happen to sound the same.
Yes. They believe these are two entirely different words with different historical roots that over centuries of linguistic shift just happen to evolve to sound exactly the same and be spelled exactly the same. Therefore, they demand two separate dictionary entries, Suspect 1 and Suspect 2.
But the opposing scholars look at the exact same data and say, no, you are overcomplicating it. This is not a shark and a dolphin. This is just one breed of dog acting in two different ways. What is the counterargument?
The scholars who reject meaning Eszā argue from a theological and psychological standpoint. They ask, do we really need to invent a brand new root word for rebellion to understand Psalm 106?
And their answer is no.
Right. If we apply, meaning deliberate planning, what happens? The Israelites are in the desert. God has provided the overarching architectural blueprint for their survival, his dibah.
But the Israelites do not like the blueprint.
No, they want to go back to Egypt. So they formulate a competing plan. They formulate their own έτσα. The scholars argue that if a human forms a deliberate plan that runs contrary to the sovereign providence of an omniscient God, that action is inherently, by definition, an act of rebellion.
You do not need a new dictionary entry for revolt because the concept is fully absorbed by the idea of malicious planning. I have to say, I push back on Driver and KBL here. I think the opposing scholars have the stronger case. If we look at the historical dynamic we established earlier, that humans despise God's blueprint, then any counterplan they draft is an insurgency.
It is a direct challenge to authority.
Yeah. If the king issues a decree and the peasants hold a meeting in a basement to draft a different set of laws, you do not need a special word to know that meeting is a revolt. The act of planning against the sovereign is the rebellion.
That is a very strong way to frame it.
And it seems the later scholarship in our data agrees. The notes explicitly state, therefore, meaning to remains questionable. The consensus leans toward the idea that meaning I covers all the necessary bases.
It is a razor-thin line, but a vital one. It forces us to recognize that our independent planning, when divorced from divine wisdom, is not just neutral brainstorming. It is an adversarial stance against the structure of reality.
So the phantom root of meaning to secondum might just be a phantom. We might not need suspect number 2. But while the scholarly world fights over whether meaning 2 exists, the lexical data throws a curveball that is absolutely undeniable.
Oh, this is the wildest part of the data.
It is physical, it is tangible, and it forces a radical gear shift in how we read the prophets. We have arrived at the tangible turn. What is meaning third?
Meaning third of O is unequivocally a separate word. It is a true homonym. It has nothing to do with abstract thought or planning.
So what is it?
It is the feminine form of the noun ate, which translates literally to wood, timber, or trees.
Wait, let me process this. We started this deep dive looking at the majesty of divine providence orchestrating the cosmos.
Yes.
We looked at corporate boardroom strategy deciding the fate of empires. We look at the mechanics of linguistic rebellion. And now the exact same sequence of Hebrew consonants and vowels means a log.
A log, timber, raw, physical wood.
That is wild.
The lexicon identifies 3 specific occurrences in the Hebrew Bible where kia must be translated as wood.
Where are they?
The first instance is Jeremiah 6.6. The second is Proverbs 27.9. And the third, which is perhaps the most theological use of a pun in ancient literature, is Hosea 10.6.
Let us unpack these, because this shift from the abstract mind to the dirt and bark of the earth is jarring. What is happening in Jeremiah 6.6?
Jeremiah 6.6 is a direct military command given by God to the invading armies that are coming to punish Jerusalem.
Okay.
The command is, cut down her trees, her unna, and cast up a siege ramp, a shula, against Jerusalem.
I see.
Here, the word refers exclusively to the raw, physical material required for military engineering. The invading army is stripping the countryside of its forests to build the massive earthen and wooden ramps necessary to breach the city walls.
This brings us full circle to the very first image we started with today.
It does.
In meaning I is the sophisticated, high-pressure military strategy being debated by the generals inside the war room. They are using their intellect to survive. But in meaning 3, the O is the actual physical wooden logs that the enemy soldiers are chopping down outside the walls to build the ramp that will crush those generals. The word encompasses both the abstract, invisible thought and the heavy, splintered wood used to execute it. That is a brilliant linguistic symmetry.
It is incredibly poetic.
What about the reference in Proverbs?
Proverbs 7.9 uses the phrase netnef nefe, which the lexical data translates as perfumed wood. It is describing incense, something that produces a pleasant aroma that delights the heart.
Okay, so that one is more straightforward. But what about the final usage?
The final usage in Hosea 10.6 is where the ancient writers weaponize this homonym for devastating theological critique. In Hosea 10.6 describes a wooden effigy.
A wooden idol.
Yes. It is a wooden idol that has been covered in gold.
Let us put the pieces together here. Hosea is prophesying to the northern kingdom of Israel, Ephraim. They are in a state of terminal political decay. The Assyrian Empire is threatening to swallow them whole.
They are desperate.
They desperately need direction. They need statecraft. In meaning I, we saw that God is great in counsel. He's the architect of reality who offers perfect providential O. But the people of Ephraim have rejected the architect. And where do they go for advice?
They go to a block of wood.
They ask a piece of timber for help.
The text specifically refers to the calf idol at Bethel. It is a piece of timber carved by human hands, overlaid with gold to look imposing, but it is utterly dead.
Now I have to ask the skeptical question.
Go for it.
If someone is listening to this right now, they might be thinking, come on, you are reading too much into this. It is just a coincidence that the word for counsel and the word for wood sound the same. It is like the English word bark on a tree and a dog's bark.
Like false friends.
Yeah, they have no historical connection. It is just a random accident of language. Did Hosea really intend to play on these identical sounds, or are we just projecting our own cleverness onto the text?
If you understand the highly structured poetic machinery of Hebrew prophetic literature, you know that there are almost no linguistic accidents.
They were very intentional.
The prophets were master poets who constantly used puns, homonyms, and alliteration to shock their audiences into reality.
Do we see this elsewhere?
All the time. The prophet Isaiah does something very similar in chapter 44 when he mocks a man who cuts down a tree, uses half the wood to bake his bread, and then carves the other half into a god and bows down to it. Hosea is operating with the same biting satire.
So Hosea is looking at a nation facing annihilation. They are frantic for a survival strategy. And he points to their golden calf and uses this specific word, you, to expose their utter insanity.
Precisely. The idol is completely incapable of speaking. It cannot calculate. It cannot offer the careful, rigorous instruction that defines meaning I of I. It is a stick.
It is completely silent.
Yet the people look to this silent timber for guidance instead of looking to the sovereign God who laid the foundations of the earth. Hosea uses the matching sound to mock the absolute absurdity of their theology. You want that. You want the wisdom to save your nation from the Assyrian war machine. Well, here is your ʻēṣâ. You get a piece of dead wood.
That is staggering. You seek wisdom, and you are handed timber. The text forces the reader to confront the terrifying emptiness of idolatry. You want a strategy to save your civilization, so you ask a log for directions.
And it perfectly encapsulates the grand contrast we've traced throughout this investigation. Human plans, no matter how brilliantly calculated in the war room, are fragile. They're swallowed up and frustrated.
Yeah.
Human idols, no matter how much gold you pour over them, are completely silent and useless. But the divine ʻē, the providence of the Creator regarding the cosmos, stands firm and unyielding. The prophetic use of this homonym exposes the supreme foolishness of exchanging the Creator's authoritative counsel for a created, silent thing.
We have covered an immense expanse of historical and linguistic territory in this deep dive today. We started with the basic root of ʻē, looking at the rigorous, deliberate nature of ancient calculation and advice. We saw how this concept permeated the entire ancient Near East, from Aramaic diplomatic courts to plaster walls in Etsah. We watched how competing councils split a kingdom under Rehoboam.
The split between the elders and the youth.
We waded into the academic dispute over Psalm 1, looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls to understand how the Essenes at Qumran physically walked out of corrupt rooms to form their own isolated community of counsel.
A literal, physical boundary.
We saw the dark underbelly of human intellect. Assassination plots against prophets and calculated economic violence against the poor.
We also analyze the sovereign providence of God, whose architectural Ada orchestrates creation itself, utilizing pagan kings like Cyrus to execute his unalterable blueprint.
Right.
We weighed the evidence in the lexicographical courtroom over whether a separate root exists for revolt, recognizing that any human plan drafted in opposition to the sovereign is, by definition, a rebellion.
And finally, we confronted the physical reality of meaning the third, where the desperate search for wisdom ends in the tragic irony of a silent wooden idol or the violent timber of a siege ramp.
It is a breathtaking spectrum for a single word.
To travel from the sovereign mind of the Creator, down through the blood-stained war rooms of ancient empires, all the way to a piece of perfumed wood.
If I can offer a final synthesis drawn from the intersections in these sources, it is this. We established that God's O represents the ultimate objective reality. It is the structural design of the universe, as declared in Job 38.
Yes.
And we saw that humans consistently use their own O to devise schemes against the vulnerable or to build wooden idols that they can control. If we look at this pattern honestly, perhaps all destructive human plotting is just a tragic, misguided attempt to seize the sovereign control that belongs categorically to the Creator.
That is a piercing observation.
When humans reject the divine blueprint, they do not actually achieve freedom. In the end, they just find themselves talking to gold-covered logs, desperately hoping the wood will save them from the siege ramps outside.
It all comes down to a battle for control. We relentlessly try to build our own plans, construct our own siege ramps, and carve our own idols, rather than submitting to the architect of reality. We want to be the ones sitting at the head of the table, giving the binding nay. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a question to consider today. Whose counsel are you genuinely seeking? Are you resting your weight on the deliberate, providential wisdom of the Creator? Or are you frantically looking for direction from the shiny, silent wood of your own making? Think about that as you go through your day. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the sources on Reformed thinking. We will see you next time.